This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends. My guest today is Sara Moslener. She is a writer, researcher, and lecturer in the Department of Philosophy, Anthropology, and Religion at Central Michigan University. She hosted the podcast series Pure White for friends of the show over at Axis Mundi Media, and is also the author of two books, Virgin Nation, Sexual Purity and American Adolescence, and the recent After Purity, Race, Sex, and Religion in White Christian America. Sara, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Blake. It's always great to talk to you. We don't do it enough, I'm realizing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's always great to talk to you as well. And if you're listening to this or watching this show, there's a very good chance that you likely already know Sara and her work. But for this first part of the interview, what we like to do is to cover some of your background. Let's start with where you were raised and what was the sort of religious environment of your childhood like?
Yeah, so I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, and my father was Presbyterian clergy in like the main line. But I went to a Christian school, K through 12, that had been started by people in the Reformed Presbyterian Church and the Presbyterian Church in America. So I sort of was in a trinity of Calvinism, and even like the PCUSA, which was very mainline, was still very evangelical. So I grew up in a very Calvinistic form of evangelicalism, and
help me out. I literally cannot keep this straight in my head. The PCA and the PCUSA, like it's too close, and I always mix up which one is the conservative version and which is the more progressive.
Yeah, so the
traditional.
Sure. So the PCUSA is the main line, right? So the more progressive, right? They are the ones that have been ordaining women since like the 50s or 60s. The PCA broke off over the issue of the ordination of women. So they're the Presbyterian Church in America. So that is people like Tim Keller is PCA.
And which denomination was your father a
He
part
was PCUSA. And so we went to this mainline Presbyterian church, but regionally, it was still very evangelical. It was very, but we weren't hard line. Whereas then there's the Reformed Presbyterian. So anyone who knows the RP Church knows Geneva College, which is where my dad taught for many years. My brothers went there, and like everyone I went to high school with went there. So Geneva College is a Reformed Presbyterian school, and they tend to be a little more hard line. Like they don't use instruments in worship. There are people who don't like celebrate holidays, and so it's distinct from the PCA. I think the PCA has more. I'd say they're more separatist than the PCA because, as we know, the folks in the PCA are very much part of evangelical, like public-facing evangelicalism. So I think of like, who's the Wolf guy, the Christian nationalist guy who wrote the book.
Oh, The Case for Christian Nationalism?
I think.
Is it Stephen Wolf or something like that?
Yeah, I think he's PSA. There's two different Wolves. I get them confused. But yeah, so there's, but all of that, even though my dad was, in a mainline denomination, I mean, all of that was sort of in the water. I was swimming in. But I never had the sense. I mean, the nice thing was there was never a sense that like if I wanted to go into ministry, like I could do that. Whereas these other churches, that wouldn't have been a possibility. But I also did feel very strongly a sense of the limits of what I would be valued for. And that had to do with finding a Christian husband, having a family, and that's something I get at in the book because I grew up in the pro-life movement. And what I have came to realize is that growing up in the pro-life movement very much shaped for me what it meant to be a good Christian woman, because one of the conclusions I come to in terms of my own story, because I incorporate into this book creative nonfiction in the form of memoir and trying to think through my own past. And what I came to realize was that the pro-life movement is not ultimately about protecting the unborn. It's about protecting motherhood as a source of authority. And so this is why women invest in it so heavily, because if you're in a culture that values women first and foremost because they are mothers, a movement that values motherhood above all else is going to be like defended as much as possible. And so legal abortion then gets perceived as being a threat to women's authority in those contexts, right? So it's an interesting dynamic, because I was trying to make sense of groups like Feminists for Life, right? And so but I do think there is a sense of this is how women gain authority, and it's in these particular contexts. So that was the world that I grew up in, and knowing that the greatest sense of authority, of accomplishment that I could have would be in finding a good Christian husband and having children. And the problem was I did not want those things. And I wanted to go farther afield. Yeah. And so as with a lot of people, college was that for me. And I also, from a pretty young age, as they say, I caught the theater bug. And I love doing theater. I did a lot of bad Christian theater, and that didn't kill the theater bug. Which is surprising. But I think there's a lot of former Christian theater kids out there. Like, we're special kind of. Yeah.
I just went last weekend. I went to a show called Benny Bingo and the Evangelical, which is playing in Chicago. Yeah. And it's an incredible musical. That's based off of Salty, the singing song.
No, who is producing it?
Maybe Hughes is their social handle on TikTok. I'll have to send you that. And it's worth a trip to Chicago to see.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
It's coming. I think it's running through February on Fridays. That's really interesting. Was that sort of a release valve for you as far as just as far as being able? A lot of theater is about subverting social tropes.
Absolutely.
Which evangelicalism is all about maintaining them. So even within the realm of doing Christian theater, I'm guessing that probably gave you a little more freedom than elsewhere.
A little bit, but it wasn't well. But I would watch good stuff. I remember watching on PBS the Steppenwolf production of The Grapes of Wrath, which is it was Tony Award winning, and it just, and I had read the book as well, but it just moved me in ways I had never felt connected to. I was like, oh, there's places in here that I have not, I'm just on the surface of, and there was something about that. I mean, one, that book made me a socialist. And two, the magic of what can happen in the theater in terms of storytelling, I was just blown away by. And so I actually studied theater in college. and really and exactly found these opportunities to subvert, to break out. And I think trying to sort of really kind of, tear away those levels of things that had made me feel safe, but also insulated me from myself in those deeper places that I was feeling like I needed to go. That, I was living a very happy Christian life. My life was very safe in many ways. I was insulated from difficult things. And I felt lots of deep feelings, but I didn't understand why. And it was because I wasn't going deep enough into myself to really understand the ways that I engage the world. And so theater, and even like the first time I saw like Christian theater, I was just like, this is taking me somewhere that nothing else does. And then I don't know if I told you this, but I lived in Chicago. So I moved to Chicago after college to pursue theater. And so, so I was sort of in that world for a little bit. So yeah. So in fact, I'm like, and I so miss living in a good theater town. So now I'm like, I need to go to, in fact, I think I'm going to convince some people we need to do a road trip to see that. But this is the kind of stuff that's coming out. I am going to. So this is kind of amazing how things, right? So I had this theater background, and that really kind of kicked things off, right? College was very much a time of starting doing that questioning process, what we now call deconstructing, and this was back in the early 90s. And so, and it was an incredibly kind of lonely and scary thing, but also incredibly freeing and being like, whoa, like, here's this big, huge world that's out there and also in me. And it took me a while to figure out how I existed in this bigger world. And I think I'm still figuring that out, because that's what it means to be human, right? I think that's the thing about evangelicalism, is it tells you have everything figured out. You know who you are, you know who your people are, you know where you belong, and so I didn't have any of those questions growing up. And then I went to college and studied theater and just studied, and I was like, who the fuck am I? Right? Like what? And I think, right, that's never gone away. And what I love about your writing is, I think, I'm not saying this to embarrass you, because I'm saying this because there is a lot of stuff that is not good in the evangelical world in terms of thinking and writing, but I think you are one of the best thinkers in terms of.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, because your stuff just hits, and it's thoughtful, and it's not reproducing the harm, which I see, which so many people have been doing, right? Because cave dwellers are not interested in. Right, like, or,
cave dweller is a complimentary
exactly. We're both, come on, we're in side by side caves.
Look at my
right?
background.
Yeah, exactly. Mine is Uncle Vanya, by the way, of Anton Chekhov's play. He's been living in the cave with me for a long time.
I don't think I don't know that I've shared this in writing, but one of the things that I identified the most with in undergrad was notes from underground, which is literally someone like a guy who's an anxious mess and like cannot make heads or tails of all of the sensory inputs from the world and from himself, and read into that as much as you want. But it's true. Like, and so like those types of people are certainly my people, or people that get my particular neurosis.
Right. Well, and we're again, right, we're all addicted to the algorithm, and like, that's just not, it's just exhausting, and it's not, and it just,
let me come back to your story a little bit. And you brought up a number of different threads. You had this influence of your dad being part of a more moderate group within his particular denomination that he was a leader in. But then you also had this educational experience at a more, I'm guessing, a more conservative coded and teaching type of K through 12 education. And then you also have the pro-life movement, which I'm guessing was if it's between the 70s to the 90s, this was like sort of very fervent phases of this, like in the shadow of Roe, and we're past Roe now. So, but that was very animating. Like there are all these things that are animating the lives, spiritual lives, political lives of the adults in your life. And you have a bit this outlet from theater. You have all of these things that go into making you forming a part of you and how you view and interact with the world. You've clearly indicated that like the prescribed things that were prescribed for you were not what you wanted. When did you make this change and be like, okay, I actually want to dive into this professionally. Like I want to make part of understanding the world that shaped me. What made you be like, okay, this is going to be the animating thing for my professional career?
So the other thing I did in Chicago was go to seminary. Then I went to Garrett at Northwestern, and I did that because when I finished college, the last thing I did was a May term out at a place called the Oregon Extension. So the Oregon Extension is a place, and their feeder schools are all Christian-ish colleges. So like where I went to Calvin, places like Hope. And it's the place where, you go out, you spend a semester living in the mountains of Oregon, reading Dostoevsky and Simone Weil and a lot of, they made like the curriculum, to sort of conflate timelines. The curriculum was deconstruction. And they are the only
but that was very likely true of when you went to school. Is like there were people in professorial leadership positions that are like these people they see the puppet strings. They know what's happening. We need to give them an outlet.
Right, exactly, right. And here I came from a world where if you're a Christian, you vote Republican. And so to see, cars in the parking lot on campus that had like a Clinton bumper sticker was scandalous for me. And so, at this, I went to a women's studies May term and was introduced to feminist theology. And that was a significant turn for me. And I was like, what? You can do that? And at that point, I was like, all right, I got some more studying to do. And the questions I had were initially around gender, and a lot of that about the ways I was socialized and felt limitations on me. And so I did a degree in feminist theology. And in the course of that, realized that theology wasn't quite my thing, because I felt a lot of pressure to actually believe something. And I was like, I don't really want to, I didn't want to make normative claims, right? Claims that, I found myself drawn to history, and I started reading, I was already familiar with Randall Balmer's work. If you remember his series, The Evangelicals, I was obsessed with that. I had the box set and
the Mine
Eyes Have Seen the Glory, right? And and the book. And so I blame him for for everything that came after. And interestingly enough, he also went to the Oregon Extension. And I was like, I need to study this evangelicalism. and figure out. And oddly, and it was never the word that we used to describe ourselves, right? We were just Christians.
Right.
And and I think there's a certain degree of supremacist thinking in that, right? That we didn't, it's like, well, we're just the Christians that have it all figured out. And so that for me then shifted everything. And when I decided, like, well, what do I do with a master's degree? And I was like, I'm just gonna keep going to school.
Keep going.
And so when I applied for doctoral programs, it was to study the history of evangelicalism and gender. That was sort of the tiny snowball that became 2 books and, a career, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And your topic and your area of study is obviously sex, gender, sexuality. Like, these things are some of the most intimate parts of who we are as people. And the idea of sexual purity that was so emphasized for multiple generations of evangelicals in a very particular way. It's very deeply personal and very deeply embodied. But before we sort of get some of those elements, I want to start a little bit more abstractly.
Okay.
I'm going to quote the introduction of your book for a second. You write that the problem with purity isn't about the desire to be good or feel safe. The problem with purity is that it creates the illusion that you must be good in order to be deserving of love and security. In order to preserve this illusion, we have learned to perpetrate a number of falsehoods about ourselves, our sexualities, our gender conditioning, our racial identities, and our collective histories. That is so many things just stacked on each other. But with that in mind, is purity as a concept, even this abstract concept, let alone how it shows up in our minds and how we relate to our bodies. Why is purity such a terrible ideal to strive for?
I'm going to answer with a story. So I'm sure you remember the Flint water crisis. When the Flint water crisis happened, right, the images that you saw on the news of rescue were pallets of bottled water from Nestle. And so this is supposed to give us hope, give us a sense of like, oh, here's a corporation doing the right thing. And in fact, after the state of Michigan stopped providing free water, right, bottled water to the people of Flint, Nestle took it over. Nestle also has control of a water source in Michigan. And for very cheaply, they have this resource. And so they bottle water from the state of Michigan and sell it back to the people of Michigan. And they've been able to get around, right? They got a contract that allows them to do that very, very cheaply. And the reason I started thinking about this is because one of the labels for Nestle water, there's a certain brand, right? That's called Pure. And so to me, this is the work that purity does. It is most effective as a marketing campaign. It is most effective at hiding the truth. It hides the truth of the compromises that are being made. And I'm actually riffing here when I say that off of a book by Alexis Shotwell called Against Purity, Living Ethically in Compromised Times. And
yeah, which you quote in your book, and I added to my TBR list.
Good, yeah.
Right after because I hadn't heard of it, and it sounds amazing.
Yeah, so it's and so, and she talks about, environmentalism, right? And also indigenous boarding schools. And so purity, the traditional definition is purity in terms of preservation, in terms of cleanliness, right? Free of dirt, right? And that these are things, right? We need to keep the pure and impure completely separate from one another in order to have anything that's pure. I find it really interesting that that definition kind of parallels Durkheim's definition of sacred and secular. But that's another conversation. And so what I think about, so purity in itself, right, exists in nature, right? We want water that is pure, meaning we want water that won't harm us. But the truth is, all of our water that isn't harmful is treated, right? It's not pure. It's treated with all sorts of things so that it doesn't harm us, right? So purity is a way to, as I just said, ignore the ways that we are compromised, and a way to promote what is seemingly ideal in order to determine the distinction between good and bad bodies, I will say. And so this has everything to do, yes, with gender and sexuality, and also with race. And I'll just stop there. I mean, it gets, Shotwell's book is deeply theoretical. And so I'm sort of getting into that space, and I'll be more concrete in terms of historically, this is where this has happened. But especially when we get into purity as myths of innocence, because if something's going to remain pure, you need to deploy myths about innocence, right? So you need to do work to maintain the illusion of purity. And that's where things go really, really wrong.
Yeah, from an individual's perspective, and particularly from a white person's perspective, the racial dynamics of purity culture aren't always the most apparent. And what I mean by that is like what people are struggling with if they were taught, true love waits, or I kiss dating goodbye. Like there's certain mechanics of sexuality, or even just things regarding desire. Like a lot of these things have really been covered a lot, different ways through books, podcasts. But this racial element is not always something that's apparent to someone's lived experience.
Yeah.
But it does make up the entire back half of your book. It was your mention of the myths of innocence in particular.
Yeah.
Those myths of innocence also contribute to a level of ignorance. If you were taught a myth of innocence, then you may have not been given the tools needed to recognize these the quote I read earlier about racial identity and collective history. How have you worked to sort of confront or approach that sort of ignorance? And again, it's two white people talking, so like,
right.
So like, but as you've studied this professionally, what, in particular, those myths of innocence, because it's such a really, really good lens. How does that relate to purity culture? How does it relate to purity as this notion of something that should be this ill-gotten ideal?
Yeah. And I will say, when it comes to, purity culture and thinking only about kind of sexuality, I mean, people of color, who I'm interviewed, who write about it, right? Race comes up right away because they understand, right, the intersections that are at work here. In terms of, and especially, so all the people of color I interviewed, which wasn't many, but they all were in white evangelical churches and very much felt that otherness and that was sort of read onto their bodies in both a racial and sexual way. So, but myths of innocence also very much have to do with being conditioned to not see. And as we know, white racial identity is very much about not seeing race, and therefore not seeing racism. And so that and so I wanted to work with these ideas, right? And so, right, sexual purity is about maintaining your innocence and therefore not not learning about it, not right. So if you don't if you don't see it, if you don't hear it,
Yeah.
it's not a thing. So it's the same principle at work. And so I wanted to flesh those out a little bit, to be able to take people back to the 19th century and to trace out a history that shows how these things were created in tandem. Because by the time evangelical purity culture emerges, right, nascently in the 1980s and then really coming full-fledged in the 90s, evangelicals were all about what we call color blindness. What is also a form of racism, but that was a virtue, right? To not think about race, racial difference, and that was sort of a post-civil rights shift for white evangelicals to be like, well, hey, this is what Dr. King said. I don't know if you've read Jesse Curtis's book.
I've read parts of it. I haven't read,
you should get him on. Yeah. Ugh. So I talked to him. He shows up in Pure White. But
for the viewer, he's the author of The Myth of Colorblind Christians.
Yes. And it's always great when you see someone who's done all the hard work to connect the dots that have already been like, they're all there. Yeah. But so when purity culture emerges, right, it's the same ideology of the 19th century when sexual purity had everything to do with race. And I'll get back to that in a minute. But when it surfaces, right, in this colorblind era, right, no one's thinking, white people are not going to be encouraged to think about race at all. And I remember the language was racial reconciliation, not racial justice. And so a lot of this, we can all come together if we just put everything behind us, if we just right? And so all this stuff is what is in fact another form of racism. And so I want people to understand that purity culture, sexual purity, is as much about our gender and sexual formation. It's as much about our racial formation. And especially for white people, it's about our white racial formation and normalizing white supremacy. And the first kind of entry point to normalizing whiteness is making it kind of invisible and very much about what's normative, right? Mm-hmm. And so what I do then with kind of the historical trajectory of the book is show how sexual purity became a virtue for women in the 19th century, for white women, at a time when slavery existed, at a time when white women became these avatars of national greatness. And so I write about in the book John Gast's image of progress, and it's this angelic figure, this white woman who's floating across the landscape. She's chasing off Native Americans, and behind her are the white men and commerce and electricity and the trains, right? And it was titled American Progress. And this was an image that was tweeted out this summer by the Department of Homeland Security. Mm-hmm. And so these are active, narratives about what the United States is, of, blatant white supremacy. And so, but what I wanted to look at was the cultural meanings attached to white womanhood and how that was happening in the 19th century. And one of those was sexual purity. And there are historians who've done work on this, and that this became an ideal, which was a significant shift if you know anything about the history of Christianity and how much of Christianity portrays women, right? Sexual purity was never, you have Mary in the Catholic Church, but she's simply the thing that you should aspire to, but you'll never achieve. right? She's the exception, and just there to remind you that you will never kind of achieve that, right? So this shift to women being sexually pure was significant, and it was done, one, for the sense of national gravitas, but also to be able to maintain the race line, what was called the race line at the time. That is the boundary between white people and black people. And especially after the end of slavery, there was significant fear, right? Black men are going to become more well-educated. They're going to be potential suitors to white women. They're going to get married and have babies, and we're going to end up with mixed race children, right? So all of this is rooted in a fear of race mixing, which is such a deep-seated fear throughout the history of the United States, going throughout the colonies, and we have not contended with it, with that, the impact of that fear. And so sexual purity was about addressing the fear of race mixing. So all of that gets lost if you're ignoring race and the history of race. So, so I wanted to bring that out. And I wanted people to be able to make those connections and think in a different way about what the lessons of sexual purity teach us about our bodies, not just about our sexuality and our gender, but about our racial identity.
And that's why I love books like yours, because they are ambitious, like, and they try to connect these deep rooted issues and these things that helped generate, and this is like, history majors of the world unite sort of stuff, because like because that's the stuff that's so fascinating. It's like, okay, you have a lot of hangups about how far you're going with your high school beau,
right? Right.
But
I love you use the word beau. Blake takes us back to 1956.
That's right. I mean, I should have said bae, shouldn't I?
Bae. You're right.
But I'm
Yeah.
But I'm not that cool, and I've been married for almost 20 years.
Love it. Love it. Yeah.
So I'm definitely out of the loop. But anyways, but that's what I love, is that is like it connects those things. It connects and says, oh, well, there was a larger insidious project at work in addition to all of these other things, and it is the both and of like the tides of history. Like we think that history doesn't matter. It's like, no, history has shaped how you view and act in your relationships. That is, and it also is popping up in our contemporary politics, just like you said. Like, these things are not. Absolutely. I think it's attributed to Faulkner. It's like the past isn't even the past. Like,
absolutely.
He's got a really good turn of phrase.
I've been, and I have come to this idea in teaching, because I teach one course, Religion, Race, and Discrimination in the U.S., right? So I'm talking about this stuff all the time. And in thinking about the suppression of history and the things that we have not contended with, that we have not come to terms with, and how, right? And so those collective failings have become a way then that they become a form of psychological neurosis. And right, because we haven't contended, certainly white people haven't collectively, with white supremacy, right? And so when you have people screaming about it and saying like, look, this is what it is, it's still like, I don't know. Right? So it's interesting how these generationally, so I don't know, maybe that's some kind of family systems theory that I'm improperly imposing onto a theory of history, but But yeah, that's something that I just, I'll sort of pop these questions out to students and be like, what do you think? And they just look at me like, what? But I think there's something to it. And again, right, this is where myths of innocence help promote that, because they tell us like, you don't need to read these, right? I mean, that's all the repression that's happening right now, right? Is because if we're going to maintain the innocence myths of our nation, right, we can't study history.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for listening to or watching this show wherever you found it. This is the first time in 10 years of doing this show that I'm actually doing it full time. And that means I need your help more than ever. And you can help out by going over to blakechastain.com/subscribe and signing up for free. Or you can upgrade to $5 a month or $50 a year and get ad-free podcasts right out of the gate. And then I'll be adding a number of other perks throughout this year. I donate 25% of net proceeds to an organization called White Homework, run by Tori Williams Douglas. That is an anti-racist education firm. And I do that as a form of economic reparations built directly into my business model. But producing these shows takes a lot of time and effort and money. And any amount of support that you're able to provide, if you're able, would be wonderful. If you value this work, please consider supporting it directly over at blakechastain.com/subscribe. Thank you. Back to the show. I actually wanted to return back to the more individual things instead of these broad historical trends. I think they're all of a piece.
Yeah.
But your book, this book, After Purity, began as an interview study that you called the After Purity Project. And I'm curious about the process. And what I mean by that is really what it entails to construct a study like this within academia. Because I think that there's probably a group of people online who've been, overexposed to discussions about purity culture online because of the way the algorithm is just feeding them things. And they may have an assumption that this area of study, this area of interest is actually seeing a glut, it's overdone. So I'm curious, like, how far that sort of assumption is from the reality you see within academia, as well as what it entails to do something like this within academia itself, because it's different than just some fly-by-night author like myself or somebody with a TikTok account. There's other criteria that you have to meet. So I'm curious what that was like for you within the confines of academia.
Yeah. So, and one thing about academic research is it's conservative in that there are so many controls about what you can say, right? Like you need evidence. And so, so for example, one thing that happened when my first book came out is one publication that was like printing an excerpt from it, put it out, and they were like, well, this is child abuse, blah, 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 making it seem like that was the argument that I was making. And I was like, no, because I was like, that's not the argument I'm making. That's irresponsible to say. And so I had this sense of like needing to protect the academic credentials, right? And sort of the like, this is what I'm saying. I'm saying this very particular thing. This is the evidence that I have. And so there is a sense that you have to craft a study in a particular way. The first thing you have to do is go through the institutional review board. And you have to write up your study, including your interview questions, and that has to pass review. And oftentimes, if it's just interviews as opposed to because the IRB does like medical research and stuff as well, usually it gets expedited. So it's a lot of work, but this time, and I had to do 3 of them for my dissertation. But there is a sense of like legal accountability, right? And I had to write up a form, and people had to sign a consent form where I explain everything to them. And so they have to be fully informed, right? So it's informed consent. And so there's a lot of work on the front end, even before you can start advertising. And you even have to submit, and you even have to talk about, how are you going to advertise? How are you going to find people to interview? And that whole kind of stuff. So there's all of that work. And unfortunately, social media, because at the time I was starting this, so 2017, 2018, right? So this was a height of the exvangelical. Thank you very much for that, by the way.
It was the first wave. There's been multiple sort of waves.
Yeah.
And then
So,
sure.
but I do think, right, because there was a cohesion happening online, finding people to interview was not that wasn't the hard part. And finding people who understood it. A lot of those people were other academics. The very first few people, I was like, oh, we're all okay. Yeah, and I think there is right a lot in terms of purity culture literacy, which we have to do for any topic because of social media, and sort of understand that there's different forms of expertise, right? Academic expertise is just one. There's also the expertise of experience, and that's where you see a lot of people on social media doing this work and wanting to share their own experiences and their own sort of process of healing, of whatever. And a lot of people make those into businesses. A lot of people, some of whom will get degrees that are necessary and appropriate, other people won't. And many of those are great people. Many of them are people I know and admire. Someone like, Linda K. Klein does wonderful work. And I think, people have said, that I have worked closely with, have said to her, your book saved my life, right? Just sort of giving people a sense of helping people understand their own experiences, right? And this is something why I sort of initially started this book. People are just desperate to understand what happened to them. And so, and of course, this is where the research right now, what we see is this glut of attention on religious trauma, right? Which is directly related. But as we know, right, it's this stuff is a minefield in terms of whether we're talking about professional ethics, right? Grifters. There's one person I know who is, and she has a PhD, and she offers these returning to your sensuality kind of workshop kinds of things, but straight up grifter. And really high end stuff. And so for a time I thought I was going to be doing that, right? Because after purity is also what are the different projects people are pursuing in this time when purity culture has been revealed to be something that's very damaging, and there's so much happening in that space. But I would say, in terms of right. And academic work is different, and I think you can't go wrong with what academics are doing. I will just say, I know many people doing academic research, and it's been, I think, one of the most amazing things to watch happen. As someone who was, I think my first book was the second book, study about purity culture to come out. And then it just, now it's people will email me and say, how do I study the field of purity culture, right? People think it's a whole field of study, and
it's becoming, it's on its way, right?
Yeah.
It's becoming.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because it's it's multidisciplinary. Most of where the stuff is happening is in counseling psychology. And so there are some amazing people who are in graduate school or just have gotten out of graduate school. So I did co-edit another book that has a lot of that newer scholarship in it called Sexual Purity and Its Discontents. Catherine House, who is a colleague of mine who teaches at Meadville Lombard in Chicago, is my co-editor. And so So yeah, some really remarkable work that has come out, amazing dissertations that have been written talking about the experiences of women of color, making connections to eating disorders. And so that's the stuff that's really popping right now,
Right.
and will continue to do so.
Is there a lot of interaction between the therapeutic fields and academia? And like how do the two different fields sort of
Yeah.
work with each other or benefit from one another's work? Like, would you say that there is like a formal dialogue between academics, or is it more just sort of ad hoc? An individual practitioner reaches out to an individual researcher
Yeah.
that's the way these connections are happening right now.
So there is, several years ago, two graduate students contacted me. They wanted to start a research collective, and they did. And it's still around. It's called the Purity Culture Research Collective, and it is primarily made up of academics of any, right? So anyone is welcome to come. So if you're an undergrad working on a project or working on a dissertation, and mental health professionals. And so yeah, so there's significant kind of conversation happening within the PCRC. There's been a lot of more recently research on purity culture and rape culture. And then like someone put something out and they're like a professor of sociology, and then they kind of show up at a PCRC meeting and it's like, yeah. So there's a really great kind of synergy that is happening among people who are actively, doing this research, which is a really vibrant context. And I think for people who are sort of just starting out, but also other people, I know people who did their dissertation and then they're like, yeah, I'm going to move on and do other things, right? Absolutely fair. But then there's other people who are like, oh, I'm going to, I'm going to get this PhD in counseling psychology. I'm going to be someone who trains people on how to do therapy for people who have this background, right? So there is that kind of pipeline happening. And then there are people who aren't doing that as well. And certainly, right, having an academic degree does not put one above reproach by any means in terms of professional ethics. And so yeah, I mean, it is a minefield. And on top of that, you have, I've only met one person who has studied evangelical purity culture who did not have experience with it. And that's out of dozens, of people. And so what that means is that a lot of people are contending with trauma. And especially as we are getting more familiar with talking about trauma and sharing trauma, right? And all of that, like that's where things get really hard. And as I've learned, right, trauma touches trauma, right? This is certainly why I started writing creative nonfiction and my own stories, because I'm like, whoa, like I have some stuff that I need to, kind of get out. And that creates an extra level of challenge, but it also makes people incredibly astute to issues of embodiment and disembodiment, right? Which was the overwhelming theme of my interviews. And when we think about the problem of disembodiment, both sexual purity and white racial identity are practices of disembodiment. And now I completely forgot what your question was. So I'll stop talking.
The initial question was about
oh yeah, academic.
The dialogue between academics and
absolutely
and therapists and other people that are practicing in mental health areas.
Yeah.
But I mean, your response is completely indicative of the way in which these issues touch so many things, and which is what's so funny, because the funny, not funny, haha,
right.
is that well, purity. One thing about purity is that it's singular. It's supposed to be this thing that's like just one thing, but actually it touches all of these things. And so that's honestly like a great way to sum up this broad conversation. There's so many other directions we could go, but I actually want to end our conversation with just some book related questions, and these are things that I'm hoping to you're my first author to ask these questions to, but I have just a quick lightning round, more from your experience as an author, just of 5 questions just to round out the interview. So here they are. First one: do you have a preference between print, ebooks, audiobooks, or are you just sort of all of the above? What's your preference?
I'm a total print girly. Yeah, I will. Audiobooks are great for traveling. If I'm impatient and I kind of want something light to read and I'm traveling, and I really like Libby, right? The app. And so you can get something, right? So there was a time when I would read a lot of ebooks, but in general, like
print's the way to go.
I want to dog ear. In fact, I have a library book right now, and I've been I want to dog ear,
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah.
Print.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love it. What is a book in your field that you think deserves more attention?
Oh, that deserves more attention. I think this book by Megan Goodwin called Abusing Religion: Literary Persecutions, Sex Scandals, and American Minority Religions. I think it is a great, especially, and I think because she comes from a Catholic background, she's no longer Catholic, and she looks at things like the Satanic Panic and films that sort of depict religious minorities as dangerous. And it's the foreign religions that are dangerous, right? That are abusive, right? That are a threat to women and children, right? And just sort of these narratives of religious abuse are weaponized against minoritized groups in the United States. And so I think that's really important for those of us who were raised in white evangelicalism and are just sort of swimming around in these pools of religious and sexual trauma and trying to keep our wits about us. I think thinking about these themes in other contexts is a good perspective, and a way that we aren't so turned in on ourselves, because I think we're so hyper individualized. We think about, what does this mean for me and me and me and me, right? And we don't so to be able to make more connection, so that we're learning more about how religious supremacy, right? How Christian supremacy works and how that's related to all of these other things. So yes, I have. So you'll probably see it backwards, but this is it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Megan Goodwin, Abusing Religion.
And she's also, I believe, a scholar who does a lot of public scholarship. She has a Keeping It 100, I think.
Yes.
Keeping It 101.
Yes.
We'll link that in the show notes. They host a show with another religion scholar.
Yeah.
We'll mention that
which
in
they've
the show notes as
just
well.
finished, but Megan is also an editor at Religion Dispatches.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. She's amazing.
Awesome. And what is a book that either gives you the most hope or makes you feel sort of alive right now? You don't have to stick to the notion of hope, but just like as far as any book that sort of energizes you, book that's doing that for you right now.
I think for me, so I'm reading more creative nonfiction. I'm reading more literary work. Right now I'm reading Carmen Maria Machado's book, The Dream House. And it's a longer title, which I'm forgetting. It's an experimental memoir. I just finished another book by Melissa Phoebos called Body Work. Those are the kinds of books. Also, I just read my first Sally Rooney, and those are the kind of books that are giving me a sense of hope, in that they feel like they're clearing up blockages in me, because I have decided I'm shifting my writing focus away from academic writing to creative writing. And that has felt incredible in terms of
That's great. Yeah.
and so I actually plan to enroll in the MA in creative writing at the school I teach at.
That'll be a fun adventure.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
and it'll, right, because what I really want is to be able to write in community with people, and so it'll be the kind of thing where I plod along for a few years. I might get a degree. I don't obviously need another one, but I want to start being a writer. I've been doing lots of readings over the last couple of years at bookstores and thinking of myself more as writing creative nonfiction. And that has just, I've been feeling a lot of burnout around academia, and I feel like that's okay. And in terms of, I'm like, you know, when this, at some point in working on this book, I said, I'm done studying purity culture. And the great thing is, like, there's so many, you know, I'm just like, oh, like, run with it. Yeah, like I have
You carried the torch.
done
and now
my
someone
due
else can.
diligence. So yeah, so it feels really freeing. It feels really, I mean, not that my well-being is at all a reflection of everything else, but as I said at the very beginning, right, I had to figure out how do the deepest parts of myself, right, engage with the world. And I think I'm finding a genre of writing where that is it. And that feels really good. So I'm still at the very beginning of that. I don't know, you know, I'm trying not to necessarily write for publication. That would be great, but I know it's a whole new field.
Yeah.
So anyway, so those are the kinds of books that are crafted among writers. There are books that are called craft books, right? That are about writing, that are about why we write, what it means to write. Those are the things that are just giving me a sense of, like, being able to imagine a future, not just for me, but if we can still, I think right now that's an act of resistance, is being able to imagine a future. I mean, it's always an act of resistance. And so my brain has been working on that problem of, especially when you're coming to the end of a big project, right? What does the future look like becomes really cloudy. And so this has given me a sense of, like, okay, I still have the ability to see what the future can be. And that future gives me hope. And I think right now that is a significant form of resistance against rising authoritarianism.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with that.
At least for introverts, right? For the cave dwellers.
Yes.
We're like, we're just going to stay in our caves and absorb all of the everything, and try not to, like, spew it out onto anyone else. And, you know, yeah.
Exactly. Turning toward advice to writers or academics getting started, regardless of their age, what is something that you wish you knew earlier?
What I wish I knew earlier. I wish I trusted myself more. I wish I was willing to make bigger mistakes and willing to risk failure. Yeah. And not that I wanted to be like, let's, do all this, but just the fear of failure, or I would say even the fear of not being perfect, is such a powerful, like, that's just so daunting. And so, so I wish I'd gotten rid of my perfectionism much, much sooner in my life.
There's a purity connection there somewhere.
Well, and the people I interviewed, like the white women I interviewed, like that themes of perfectionism, wanting to be good and be seen as good, right? I mean, that, right? That was over and over again. And when people started saying that, I was like, fuck, that's like I need to do some digging, right? But yeah, I mean, being willing to, and I think that goes also, one of my earliest lessons in thinking about whiteness and racism is, white people need to be willing to fuck up. Because otherwise, the other alternative is silence, right? And,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So we just, no, that's not acceptable.
Yeah. Right.
So, yeah.
Well, final question for you. This is a magic wand question. If you had a magic wand, how would you, influence the world, change the world, whatever, in one particular way?
In one particular way, yeah.
How would you encourage
Yeah.
more reading and literacy
Yeah.
in today's media climate?
Yeah. I would make education a valuable asset, not economically, but for citizenship. And that would be sort of universally understood that education is valuable, that educated people are valuable and necessary for a healthy democracy. And therefore, everyone gets to go to college for free.
Love it. Love it. Sara Moslener, she is a writer, a researcher, a podcaster, many things, including the author of the new book, After Purity, which is available wherever you can find books. You'll also find links in the show notes. Is there anything else you'd like to plug here at the end, Sara?
That's all. You say all those things, and then I'm like, all I want to be doing right now is sitting on my couch knitting. So
That's all fair.
Also epic knitter, right? I mean,
Epic knitter.
It's so funny to have this image of myself, like spending all this time on my couch, right, dressed like this, looking like this. This is me, and then having people be like, "Oh, you've done all these, really?" So anyway, it's fascinating. Yeah, if all you're doing, so please don't be when you hear people, okay, all the impressive things that they've done. Like, just imagine them sitting on their couch knitting.
They still come and sit on the couch like everybody else.
Yeah,
Exactly. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you very much, Blake. It's been great.